This morning we looked at how that sometimes people seek preeminence because of the working of pride in the heart. Tonight we want to look at something that we feel like flows out of that, something that is in our mind to some degree a fruit of pride. Certainly it's something that we don't want to find in our own heart, in our own life. Tonight, let's turn to Psalm 101. And as you're turning there, we'd like to ask you a question, maybe even respond by show of hands. How many believe that the Bible teaches against gossip? Now here's a question for you. Have you ever tried to look it up in a concordance? You say, why? You're not going to find it there, at least not in Cruden's concordance. And certainly a concordance of the King James Bible, I don't think you'll find it there. And so we could ask the question, well, why do you think it teaches against gossip? Well, we will find that it certainly does teach against gossip. It's just not necessarily described by that word. Gossip is an interesting word. It actually had an old meaning of godparent. Now, how that ties in, I don't totally grasp. But the understanding of it today is this: one who chatters idly or repeats rumors about others. Such talk or rumor, to indulge in idle talk or rumors about others. Certainly, if you've got a functional rumor mill somewhere, you've got a gossip. So in Psalm 101, we want to read verses 5 and 6. It says this: "Whoso privily slandereth his neighbor, him will I cut off. Him that hath a high look and a proud heart will not I suffer. Mine eyes shall be upon the faithful of the land, that they may dwell with me. He that walketh in a perfect way, he shall serve me." Now in this psalm, David is speaking of those things that he was pursuing, and you might say he was pursuing them to the good of his kingdom. Certainly, if you wanted to be a king over a good kingdom, I'd say this: if you can cut off gossip, you'll have a much better kingdom. Certainly, we know that there is in all nations, I guess, what you'd call papers that pretty much spread gossip. They're called various things. But we want us to see that he was speaking here, and he says, "Whoso privately slanders his neighbor, him will I cut off." Now, he describes it as privately slanders, but in other words, you'll see sometimes in the scripture that takes in the same thought is a whisperer. A whisperer. One that kind of, they'll get with people and say, well, just between me and you. Well, just between me and you. If we got to keep it just between me and you, maybe you can just keep it with you. And then me won't have to worry about it. That way, people come to you sometimes and they go at it almost like it's a secret, but then you find out that secret is kind of gone public. Kind of somehow got spread, and You can always wonder what spread it. But we need to see that David was looking at it and saying, I don't need this kind of people. I just as soon cut this off. I'd soon bring it to an end. But he ties it in also with him that has a high look and a proud heart will not I suffer. And here's what we see: a proud look, a high look and a proud heart. In reality, most times when people are gossiping about somebody, here's what's happening. I'm tearing them down to make me look better. I'm trying to make them look small and bad so that I can make me look good. Well, if that's our way of looking good, I'd say this, and that's not a very good way to look good, because in reality it don't look too good at all. It just exposes that which is at work in our own heart. And certainly we should think upon our words. We should think upon our words and the effect that they're having. We think about the concept of a gossip, and really two words that you find is this one that's translated privately slandereth his neighbor, or a whisperer, or the other term you find is a backbiter. Now we might read backbite and think, well, that's maybe someone that talks back. But in reality, what a backbiter is someone that speaks against. And so the words that are being spoken are spoken against someone. Now, we remember from our younger days someone having the thought that if you don't have anything good to say, just don't say anything. And certainly there's a lot of truth to that. If we do not have something good to share about others, it would be better if we just didn't say anything. Just kind of shut our mouth and endured the silence. Now, that's sometimes a challenge for us as people. You say, well, what do you mean it's a challenge? Interesting thing, early in my career, I had one of my fellow workers said, I'm being promoted to a new job, and you have the opportunity possibly to be promoted to my job only if you go ask for it. And he says, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go ask for it, and they're going to, among other things, tell you that you're not qualified and what you need to do to advance. But he said, here's what happens. If the manager doesn't want to talk about it, when you bring the subject up, he's going to sit there and be quiet. And he says, what happens is you can't take the silence, so you'll start talking about something else, and he'll never talk to you about the thing you wanted to know the answer to. He said, I found that out because they teach it in management school, that if you do not want to answer the question, just sit silent long enough and they'll start talking and you can go on. Why? Because people have a tough time bearing the silence. Well, that gets people into a lot of trouble. When they ought to have been silent, they find themselves talking and saying all kinds of things that would have been better left unsaid. So if you find yourself in a silence, just find the courage to remain silent, or find a topic that would edify instead of one that would tear down. And we think about it, Christ spoke in one place. He said, we'll give an account of every idle word. And gossip is tied in with idle words, just chatter. Just chatter. But many times the trouble is the chatter goes in the wrong direction and does damage. Now over in the Proverbs, and we won't turn there, but it says this about people, and we need to think about it. It says that the mouth of a righteous man is a well of life, but violence covers the mouth of the wicked. Now, most time we think of violence in kind of a physical way. But you know, if we really think about it, gossip can do as much to hurt a person if you just walked up and hit them. In fact, sometimes the damage would be less if you just walked up and hit them. But we need to see that our mouth can do one of two things. It can be a mouth of violence that goes around doing damage to others, or it can be a well of life. It's a matter of what words and things we choose to share when we find ourselves inclined to speak. Certainly we do not want to speak in such a way that we would be slandering someone else. You know, sometimes we think about it. People maybe get the idea, well, what I'm saying is true. And it might be at a certain level. But could we share this thought? What kind of context are you putting in it? And what kind of inflection is it spoken with? See, we can take something true even and make it hurtful if we go at it the right way. Now in Proverbs 10 it also says this, and this is a good thing for us to consider when the silence is wearing upon us. It says, in the multitude of words there wanteth not sin, but he that refraineth his lips is wise. So the writer of the Proverbs had that to say, is in the multitude of words, we can easily end up in the wrong place. But he says, he that refrains his lips is wise. Just as that person told me, he said, you know, if you really want the answer to your question, go ask the question and sit still and be quiet till he answers it. And you know, I did that, and he answered it. It worked. There was some truth to what he had to say. And the interesting thing was, I had worked for this fellow for 4 or 5 years, and there were times when we went through kind of the same routine, and I never got the answer. And I believe it was exactly what the guy said. I didn't know how to ask the question and be quiet. It was a good lesson. It taught me that there is some wisdom in knowing how to refrain our lips. Knowing how to say a thing and then say, I've said enough. I'm going to sit and listen. And I'm going to listen for however long it might take for it to turn out well. Certainly, it's easy to get wrapped up in words. And you know, you can kind of just get into this thing where there's just one thing feeds another and one thing feeds another. And you know, one of the things with gossip, if we're not careful, we need to concern ourselves about both sides of it, because here's the thing. It's bad enough that one person is talking against someone. It's even worse that oftentimes the hearer is egging them on. Yeah, okay, yeah. I don't want to be on either side of that. And as we look at the scripture, we'll see that really the good thing is not to be on either side of that. The conversation's going the wrong way. It's time for a little silence so we can get back on the right path. Now if we turn over to Jeremiah chapter 9. In Jeremiah chapter 9, beginning at verse 1, it says, "Oh, that my head were waters, and mine eyes a fountain of tears, that I might weep day and night for the slain of the daughter of my people. Oh, that I had in the wilderness a lodging place of wayfaring men, that I might leave my people and go from them. For they be all adulterers, an assembly of treacherous men. And they bend their tongues like the bow for lies, but they are not valiant for the truth upon the earth. For they proceed from evil to evil, and they know not me, saith the Lord. Take ye heed every one of his neighbor, and trust ye not in any brother. For every brother will utterly supplant, and every neighbor will walk with slanders. And they will deceive every one his neighbor, and will not speak the truth. They have taught their tongue to speak lies, and weary themselves to commit iniquity. Thine habitation is in the midst of deceit. Through deceit they refuse to know me, saith the Lord. Therefore thus saith the Lord of hosts, Behold, I will melt them and try them. For how shall I do for the daughter of my people? Their tongue is as an arrow shot out. It speaks deceit. One speaks peaceably to his neighbor with his mouth, but in heart he layeth wait. Now you talk about a picture of how gossip works. That's about as good of a picture as you can get. It certainly describes the effect and the working of gossip among people. It speaks of how we think about how the prophet said, I wish my head was full of water and my eyes a fountain of tears, that I might weep about the condition. And certainly it is a sad condition. And why is it a sad condition? Because as gossip works, trust is destroyed. See, it's not just that it tears down another person, but it destroys trust. And we think about it when you have like a workplace and you get all this office gossip going on, it's not long till everybody feels in a way kind of alone. I can't trust my neighbor because I don't know what he's doing behind my back. You know, he smiles and says hi and treats me good, but as he describes there in verse 8, he says, one speaks peaceably to his neighbor with his mouth, but in his heart he lays wait. You know, I'm just waiting for one word out of place. I'm just waiting for one little tidbit, and I'll have a whole story when I get done. And it goes on. It goes on. You might say all over the world. But we would say this: I don't believe God ever intended it would go on among His people. I don't believe that it's acceptable in the sight of God. And as we consider what the prophet says here, it certainly clearly portrays the problem that exists. As people go about spreading stories, and you know, we really do. As we said, you can spread something that's true, but you can also convey something that's not. Just by the attitude, by the spirit in which it's spoken. It's also very easy to take things that maybe there's an element of truth there, but by the time the story's over, it's not exactly the same story anymore. The element of truth has been lost. The element of truth has been lost in embellishments and in other things. So we need to see It really is better if you can't say something good. Just enjoy the silence. Just enjoy the silence. Why? Because I don't want to destroy trust. I don't want to be the one that separates real friends. I don't want to be the one we think about, we spoke of the wicked, their mouth being covered with violence. This is a picture of the violence. It's just like they were at war. It speaks of them shooting their bow and taking aim one at another. So we see, we really do need to not just think about what we say, but a lot of times it'd be good if we could just listen to what we say. Listen to what I myself am saying. Because sometimes you might find yourself going, I don't like the sound of that. I don't think I should have said that. We think about Brother Kelly up there in Montana, and sometimes he'd just go so far in a conversation and say check, and he was done. Why? Because something had hit him. This has gone far enough. I'm approaching the line, and I need to quit. And certainly that would be good for us as well as we speak our words to take care that if it's going down the wrong track, it's time to quit. Now in Proverbs 25, in verse 23, we won't turn there, but it says this: the north wind drives away rain. So doth an angry countenance a backbiting tongue. In other words, you think about it. Now, maybe it's not that way exactly here in Oklahoma, but the thought was you get the right conditions and it stops the rain. And it's saying if you get the right conditions, that person that's speaking against someone will shut up. Well, what's the right conditions? He says an angry countenance. And what I believe he's trying to convey, if you don't encourage it, most of the time the gossip will stop. That's why as a hearer, you need to think about your part in gossip. As a hearer, you say, well, I thought we just had to make sure I didn't say anything. Well, I got to make sure I don't say things that I ought not to be saying, but at the same time, I need to make sure I'm not listening to things I ought not to be hearing. And so he's making the point that if a backbiting tongue comes around, if someone comes around you talking someone down, maybe what you need to say is, well, I think they're pretty good. You talk about winding things down. It's my understanding that people have studied gossip that way, and they said it's pretty surprising how quick the conversation will wear out when somebody speaks out and said, well, I don't see it that way. I don't look at it that way. All of a sudden, the one speaking against discovers they have not got a receptive audience. And so it changes the whole picture. Well, we need to understand our ear should not be there to be filled with gossip. The thing is, someone that's carrying on that way does not need encouragement. They need discouragement of such behavior. And really, as we consider that, we would say this. Here's the problem for the person that listens to gossip. To be just, when you've heard the person speak against someone, you now have an obligation to go to that someone and hear their side of the story. You just obligated yourself to go check the matter out. It would have come out a lot easier if when it started you just said, stop right there. My ears are not made for this. Why? Because if somebody comes to me tearing someone down, I think the other person justly deserves the opportunity to defend their side, to speak up and present their side of the story. This is what they said, now here's what I got to say about it. Here's the real story. You say, well, is that significant? Is that needful? Absolutely. We have had, in our experience, we've had people come to us and say, I heard such and such and such and such. And you go, really? Really? I had someone come to me one time and said, I hear you're drawing government assistance. I went, really? Really? News to me. I never got a check in the mail. Well, I knew that at the base of that there might have been some kind of a piece of information that maybe had a little truth to it, but the story was totally incorrect. And I think how the story came about, with having a large number of kids, someone sent a paper home and said, you could get reduced price lunches at school with all of your kids, even with what you make. I said, I don't need government help. God gave me a good job and I'm making good money. I don't need to go through all of that. But someone maybe heard that one little piece of information that I could have qualified for it and assumed I had started receiving it and spread the story. So the reality is, if you listen to someone speak against someone, you've only heard some portion of the story at best. And if you're going to be just, you absolutely need to go to the person and find out what they have to say about the story. And the interesting thing is the writer of the proverb said, angry countenance driveth away a backbiting tongue. Here's an interesting thing. If a person starts to share gossip with you, if you'd say, well, understand, whatever you tell me, I'm going to that person to talk to them about it. You'd probably discover that the story ends right shortly. If they know up front that this is not private, it is not privileged, it is not confidential, because justice demands it, I'm going to the other person and I'm going to tell them, so-and-so told me this and this and this, and I want to hear your side of the story. You see how our ears, we need to protect our ears as well as our mouth. We need to protect our ears as well as our mouth. Gossip is a very destructive thing, because someone can start a rumor and spread it around, and people's attitudes towards the person that the rumor is about can be changed, and the person has no idea why they are experiencing what they are experiencing. They have no idea. Why? Because it's all being done privately. It's all, and eventually maybe someone will have the courage to say something to the person and go, did you really do this thing? What thing? What thing? It's destructive. And because of that, we really do need to see that should not be part of the life of a Christian. We should not allow that to be part of our life. Either spending our time listening to it or spending our time spreading it. If we turn over to 2 Corinthians chapter 12, We'll begin reading at verse 19. It says, "Again, think ye that we excuse ourselves unto you? We speak before God and Christ, but we do all things, dearly beloved, for your edifying. For I fear lest when I come, I shall not find you such as I would, and that I shall be found unto you such as ye would not, lest there be debates, envyings, wraths, strifes, backbitings, whisperings, swellings, tumults, and lest when I come again, my God will humble me among you, and that I shall bewail many which have sinned already, and have not repented of the uncleanness and fornication and lasciviousness which they have committed." Now Paul was writing to him here, and he was explaining to him. He says, I'm writing to you not just to defend myself, but to edify, to build you up. And certainly that's what our mission in life should be as well, to build up others, to strengthen, to encourage, to help them in the things of life. But he was writing to him, he says, but I fear this, that when I come, I'm not going to find you like I would have it. And I'm afraid that you're going to find that I'm not going to be like you would have it. He said, why? Because if there's debates and envyings and wraths and strifes and backbitings and whisperings, and you start picturing all the things that can go on with a tongue that's cut loose. And really we understand that it's not just the tongue by itself, it's what's driving it. But he said, lest I be humbled and bewail many that have sinned already. In other words, he could have just said it simply in our language. The picture's not going to be pretty if this is the condition. The picture's not going to be pretty. He was going to come and he said, I'm going to, if I see all of this kind of stuff going on, I won't be indifferent. I won't be unaffected. But he said, I'm going to bewail some things. I'm going to be sorry about some things. I'm going to be speaking up because those conditions ought not to exist among the people of God. He wanted things to be like God wanted them to be. He wanted people to be benefited and blessed by being part of the body of Christ. He wanted people to be benefited and blessed by the encouragement and edification they received as they walked together with God. But to do that, we're going to have to stay humble. We're going to have to stay at the feet of Jesus. We're going to have to be willing to look at the things we do and why we do them. Because if old pride is at work, and pride is about as sneaky of a thing as a person can get. If it's at work, it needs to be dealt with and defeated. Certainly in the body of Christ, we should not be trying to gain preeminence over one another. We should not be trying to tear down someone else to advance our own cause. We should not be trying to get the advantage of someone. We should all be seeking after Christ and seeking that Christ would be manifest in our life, in our words, in our action, such that as people are able to see Christ in us, they would be drawn to Him. Seek to serve Him and enjoy the benefits that are there in salvation. we can see that, many times people get the idea, well, pride, it's just pride. No, pride is the source of many troubles. We look back over the years of our life and we can say this. We can see situations that we look at it and we go, if pride had not been at work, it could have been different. If humility had been allowed to do its work, if people had gotten before God as they needed to and found the help that God had for them, it could have been different. That pride is destructive in its workings. And certainly the working of gossip is one of the ways that it works to destroy and tear down. Now if we turn to Psalm 15, begin at verse 1. It says, Lord, who shall abide in thy tabernacle? Who shall dwell in thy holy hill? He that walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. He that backbiteth not with his tongue, nor doeth evil to his neighbor, nor taketh up a reproach against his neighbor. We see he's focused on the question of who shall abide in the Lord's tabernacle. Who shall dwell in thy holy hill? Or we could put it this way, who's going to be a part of the city of God? He that walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. Now you think about what we read there in Jeremiah, and it wasn't a picture of people speaking truth in their heart. It wasn't a picture of things being faced as they were. It was a picture of deceit, of lies, of slandering people behind their back. We need the truth in our heart. We need to look at things like they are. We need to face them in their reality. It says, he that backbiteth not with his tongue. In other words, my tongue is not given for speaking against and tearing down other people. It says, doesn't do evil to his neighbor. Certainly, a neighbor takes in a lot of things. Takes in a lot of things. It's not just the folks next door. But at a minimum, we'd say this, it takes in the community of which we are a part. It says, nor taketh up a reproach against his neighbor. I don't want to do people wrong. Don't want to do something that reflects badly on them either. We want to be, as we read there in Proverbs chapter 10, where it says, the mouth of a righteous man is a well of life. That is, in fact, who is going to abide in the Lord's tabernacle, who's going to dwell in his holy hill, is a person whose mouth is a well of life, instead of given to tearing people down. We live in a strange world. We know that there's a lot of destruction going on that way. We think about even in our seasons of politics, we live in the politics of personal destruction, tearing people down. That's bad enough to be able to look out there and say, well, it's out there. Because I believe as people of God, we need to look at it seriously and say, I don't want it in here. I don't want it at work in me. May God stir our hearts to think about it, because in society there's this saying, talk is cheap, and I realize that you can talk big and never produce, but talk, if we're not careful, talk is cheap, and we don't think about the significance and the impact of it like we ought to. It's easy just to get caught up in filling the silence and be talking when we should have been quiet. And by our own words, not only destroy others about us, but I would say this, ultimately, a person given to gossip is going to destroy their own soul. Why? Because they won't be guiltless. They won't be guiltless. If you've gone through life tearing down and destroying other people, the only way that's going to change is for you to get to God. Say, God, I am sorry about the life I've lived. I'm sorry about the things I've done. And get before God and humble your heart and say, God, by your grace, I don't want this to be part of me anymore. I do not want it to be my way of life. May God stir us. May God help us to examine our hearts, to make sure that we are in fact submitted to Christ. And that as we live our life, our words are the words that Christ would have spoken, and not just an outpouring of pride from our heart.